the Bible, our book, gathered from scraps of ancient literature dating back to as early as the Iron Age, developed by the Jewish community during the centuries before Jesus. First the Torah, and then the prophets, and then the writings. Translated from Hebrew into Greek, and then from Greek into Latin, and then from Latin into every language. Canonized into the Bible essentially as we know it in the 4th century Common Era. The Bible. Its reading was heavily guarded by the church until a combination of events occurred. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century and the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. After that, the Bible was available to the masses. And today, one version or another can be found in almost every home in the world. Quick question. How many Bibles do you have in your home? Go ahead, take a minute, count them up. Question number 2. When was the last time, honestly, you opened one of those Bibles? And now, question number 3. Have you ever tried to throw a Bible away? It's really hard. The Bible, our book. The one book we followers of Jesus have in common. But oh, how we differ on the place of this book in our own faith tradition. Some of us venerate the Bible, thank you, and say it was written essentially by the hand of God. Some of us see the Bible as an ancient document. It might have had some relevance back in the day when it was written, but that is no longer to be followed. That it is, in fact, dangerous in the hands of some believers. And the rest of us perhaps find ourselves somewhere in the middle, figuring that the Bible must be important since we quote from it every time we worship, and parts of it are excellent, and parts of it are instructive. And maybe it's worth reading and studying the Bible as a way to get inside the culture out of which our faith emerged, or maybe as a way to get inside the heads of some of the leaders of our faith tradition. Maybe. The Bible. It is our book. But in the wrong hands, it can be so dangerous. And unfortunately, many people throughout history have been damaged, injured, and a whole lot of people have lost their lives as a result of what's been written in this book. The Bible, our book. Today, we are going to look at a text in the Bible that has done particular damage over the course of history, and that is especially relevant this weekend as the damage caused by this text we'll look at has been directed toward people who have been enslaved. And the content of this text has over the years allowed one group of people to enslave another group of people in the name of God without conscience. This is one of those places, not because it's in the Old Testament and not in the New Testament, no, but because this story is in the Bible at all. It calls us to read with an appreciation for the context and to understand that while the Bible can be an important resource of faith, it can also be very, very harmful. And ironically, this book, our book, has most recently been particularly harmful to people of color. In the larger sweep of history, it's people of color who have been damaged in so many ways by this book. And people on the margins of society have been the ones damaged by this book. And even though, as I've heard recently, and I feel is so true, the Bible doesn't even have any people who are white in it. And the scriptures were written almost exclusively by refugees. So, we will be looking at the story today of the banishment of the slave Hagar and her son Ishmael, found here in our book. Let's pray. Here we are, O God, sitting in our own private spaces, our kitchens, our living rooms, our offices, or maybe if we're lucky, our back porches. But here we are at this unique point in time, offering prayer to you. And our prayer to you today, O God, is to widen the frame of where we are just now. Our prayer to you is to help us zoom out from our particular places. Help us widen the frame to include the people we normally worship with and that we miss so much, to see their faces, to imagine their hugs and their handshakes, to picture them singing in the pew next to us, or to imagine them chatting over a cup of coffee. Help us widen the frame to include others in our community of faith, O God. But help us widen it even more. Help us, O God, to widen the frame to include people around our city, around our community. People whose lives are troubled, but who are beyond our capacity to see. Help us include in the frame of this prayer people of color, people who have been marginalized, people who fear the loss of their privilege, people who make up the fabric of our country and who make it the beautiful tapestry that it is. And help us widen the frame even further, O God, to include those who lived their lives before we came along, those whose stories have been instrumental in the forming of our own stories, those whose enslavement has made our lives a privilege possible, those whose struggle against racism has shown us the way, those whose protests have made our lives easier. Help us widen the lens of our world during this time together, O God, and remind us to include in that widening lens the courageous life and witness of Jesus, whose sacrifice has made such a difference for each of us, and whose life is called to mind whenever we pray this prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who've trespassed against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, and welcome to worship at Christian Temple. I'm Mark Wilson, Director of Music, and I'd like to share a short introduction to the music we'll be offering today. Today's prelude is a beautiful piano arrangement of Be Thou My Vision. It was arranged by my friend and colleague, Dr. Jefferson Cleveland, He and I were students together at Peabody Conservatory, and Jeff was later selected as one of the main editors of the United Methodist Hymnal, which was published in the late 1980s. Sadly, Jeff died in the late 90s, at the height of his musical career. The choral anthem is Mighty Like a Stream, arranged by Moses Hogan. Dr. Hogan's arrangements are frequently sung by outstanding choirs around the world. Sadly, we lost Dr. Hogan about 10 years ago, but his arrangements will continue to live on forever. Our closing music will be We Are Marching in the Light of God. The focus of this week's worship service is to celebrate the holiday of Juneteenth, and Siyahamba is a very fitting tribute to this celebration of freedom. Enjoy. Again, I wish for you a safe and healthy week. I look forward to seeing many of you at our outdoor worship service next Sunday, June 28th. In the meantime, please continue to stay safe and healthy. Thanks, and have a wonderful week.
The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and he sent her away. And she departed and wandered about the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Do not let me look on the death of my child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink.
Will you pray with me? Loving God, it is our prayer just now that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing to you. For you remain our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The year was 1979. I was in my senior year of college at Western Maryland College, now McDaniel College. And earlier that year, we had hired a hotshot choir director right out of graduate school. And our new hotshot choir director had decided to take his new choir on a choir tour through the deep South during the springtime of our senior year. What a way to finish our senior year. I guess I shouldn't be gloating about that with so many senior years that have been derailed this year. Such a sadness. But we went on that choir tour. We rehearsed the pieces we would be performing. We performed a farewell concert on campus, and then we headed south. We went down into southern Maryland. We went into Richmond, Virginia. We went down further south into Charleston, South Carolina. We got down as far as Savannah, Georgia. Our audiences were, well, to be honest, very modest. In fact, I think the only people that typically showed up for our concerts in the churches where we performed were the ones who had promised to take members of the choir home to stay overnight and feed us breakfast. Our crowds were small, but they were enthusiastic, I think. Well, to be honest, I can't even remember how enthusiastic they were. But I do know that those crowds down in the deep South, they loved our choir's grand finale, the song we would close down the show with. In the deep South, in the spring of 1979, we closed every concert with a slow, mournful a cappella version of Dixie. Dixie. Oh, I wish I was. Dixie closed the show. Dixie brought down the house for those handful of people who showed up in the deep South in 1979. I know it wasn't all that sensitive to the issues of the day, our pretty much all-white choir singing Dixie. But we didn't really know about all those issues back then in our little choir, to be fair, or did we, maybe? I know that the song talks about, in Dixieland, I'll take my stand, and that the song rocketed to success because it was part of a popular black-faced minstrel show. The 1850s. Everybody loved to see that blackface. But that was then, right? I know that this song has become something of a national anthem for white nationalists and that it is inextricably tied to the Confederate flag. But give us a break. That was way back in 1979. And we were just college kids, right? If someone would have told us that we should probably not be singing Dixie back in 1979 when we were seniors in college, we would have protested loudly. Come on, man, we don't mean anything by it. It's a pretty song and a beautiful arrangement. Let's just let it go, for goodness sake. This kind of makes me think about all this fuss about removing the Confederate flag from the state houses across the South. Really? Southeastern Conference Athletic Conference isn't going to play any more football games in Mississippi unless they take the Dixie, the flag, off of their state flag. That seems a little extreme. Or how about NASCAR banning the Confederate flag at all its races? NASCAR? Taking down all those statues that honor the leaders of the Confederacy. All those statues that were built in the early 20th century by so many groups that were still sympathetic to the Confederacy and all that it stood for. But they tell our history, right? Kind of reminds me of HBO pulling Gone with the Wind until it can be shown with some contextual explanation about the cruelty and not the happiness of slavery. Oh my, what are they going to do next? Next thing you know, they're going to make us take Aunt Jemima off the shelves or Uncle Ben's converted rice. Come on, where does it stop? Renaming all those military bases, for goodness sake? Named after the heroes of the Confederacy, Forts Benning, Bragg, Hood, Lee, Pickett. Come on, they're just military bases. These places are part of the fabric of our country, aren't they? Do we really have to go to such extremes to honor the experience of black and brown people in this country? Do we really have to destroy so much of who we are and who we've been just because of that little thing that is also true of who we are? Oh, that little thing, that slavery thing, that Native American genocide thing. Maybe some of us are thinking along these lines as the moral weight of our history is catching up to us, being built on the backs of enslaved people, becoming more and more of a burden to be dealt with. But if there are any of us who are thinking, come on, man, we got to stop somewhere. For any of us who are thinking, we have done enough, haven't we? To make up for our sin of slavery. I didn't hold any slaves personally, after all. So why me? Why us? Why now? For any of us who might be tempted toward this line of reasoning, I just want us to look at this story for today. The expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael. Wow. The expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael from the people of God. You remember the story? Sarai and Abram had been given a promise from God, right? You will be parents of a great generation. And everything was going just fine. They were obedient and all that, except for that one thing, that parent part. Sarai bore Abram no children. So Sarai ordered Abram to lie with the slave girl Hagar, so there might be a child with whom to begin this great nation. From the beginning, things did not go well. Sarai accused Hagar of looking upon her with contempt, which may have been true, or it may have been a little projection on Sarai's part, who was, as the story says, unable to conceive, and so when Hagar conceived so easily, according to the story, Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar, the slave girl, which caused Hagar, understandably, to run away in fear. God knows what kind of harshness Sarai had cooked up for her slave girl. Then Hagar, who is essentially a runaway slave, meets an angel of the Lord who says to Hagar, what? Return. Return. Return to your mistress and submit to her. Oh. Which she did. And Ishmael was born, the son of a slave and the head of the household. I wonder if that ever happened in the deep south. And then there was the whole story of Isaac being miraculously born to Abraham and Sarah. One might have thought that this might have been able to fix things between the two. But no. Nope. There was that day. That day Carrie was telling us about. That day when Isaac was weaned, a cute little toddler. On that very day, Ishmael, the son of the slave and head of a household, was seen by Sarah playing with the little toddler Isaac. And Sarah hit the roof. Cast out this slave woman. Hear that? Hear that ringing through the ages. Cast out this slave woman. Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. Abraham was distressed, but didn't really see any alternative. Kind of makes you think Sarah was the strength in that couple. So Abraham woke up early the next morning, woke up Hagar and Ishmael and gave them a loaf of bread and a skin of water. Abraham walked them to the edge of the camp and then, almost hiding his eyes, sent them on their way into the wilderness. They just about died out there on their own. After they had run out of their meager supplies, Hagar sets Ishmael underneath a tree at some distance, so she won't have to watch her son die in front of her. Did you know that Hagar is the first character in the Bible to weep? To weep. To weep for her son Ishmael. She has a lot to be sad about, doesn't she? But then, in a turn not unlike the story of Abraham and Isaac, when Abraham was just about ready to light the match, remember that one? Out in the wilderness, an angel intervenes. A well of water appears, and the rest is history. Hagar and Ishmael managed to make it, and of them became a great nation. Now, I know that this story is essentially a story of origin, that it's meant to explain the nations that arose and competed over the years with the Hebrew people. And I know that the story has more recently been interpreted as the origin story of Islam. And I get that Abraham is a sympathetic character in this story. In fact, some midrash on this text suggests that Abraham and Hagar are reunited near the end of Abraham's life after Sarah has passed away. I know that this is a rich story filled with nuance and detail and drama, but I also know that this story has been used and abused. This story from the Bible has been used to injure people by people of privilege, by white people whose practice was to enslave people of color. This story has been used to justify that behavior. Can't you just hear the sermons ringing out of the pulpits? Close your eyes and imagine with me some of those congregations in the Deep South where our college choir sang only 200 years earlier. Listen to the preacher preach on this text. The angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar and said, "Return to your mistress." God's will is for those slaves to return to their masters. So go out and round them up, boys. Or imagine the ringing refrain from the sermon on this text for today. Cast out this slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with my son Isaac. Oh, the Bible, our book, such a dangerous thing, so often misused, so often used to kill. And yet, the people against whom the Bible was so harshly used, miraculously, have managed to find a rich faith based on its stories. And even though we don't hear much about her in our Sunday school classes, us people of privilege, us white folks, one of the heroes of the faith for our African American sisters and brothers is none other than Hagar. An entire people has found in this story, a story that was used against them for so long. They have given us a new take on this narrative that invites, yea, urges, yea, compels us to re-examine so much about our own stories and see them for what so many of them are. No matter how much a part of the fabric of our history they might be. Tales told to justify and then solidify the dominance of one people over another. Tales that are still out there in the atmosphere, in the statues and the flags that dot our landscape. People of God, we just might be living in a moment in time when those tired old stories that have done so much to harm over the years are traded in on new ones. We might be living in such a time. Imagine Juneteenth being celebrated with the same gusto as the 4th of July. Imagine the statues that might go up on the pedestals left bare by the removal of so many heroes of slavery. Imagine a march on Washington that would relegate a rally in Tulsa to the back page of the newspaper. What might our world be like if we white folks were finally able to admit to ourselves, it's okay, we can do it, to admit to ourselves that, yeah, we have built this country on your backs, and we are ready to apologize for it, and to do what is right, to make it up. Imagine such a day. It may be that this day isn't as close as it sometimes seems. Even though there's hope in the air now, we may just drop back to business as usual. But we are called still by the stories that can be reimagined. We are called to imagine such a day that is a reunion of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael, all sitting down at the table together. All together as the people of God. Let us imagine this day as we pray along with the Reverend Latrell Easterling, Bishop of the Baltimore-Washington Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Gracious and holy God, you are our help in time of trouble. Jehovah Jireh, you provide all that we need. Emmanuel, you are with us on this day and every day. Creator of all, who breathed your pneuma into dust and formed and shaped humanity in your image. We know you hear the cries of your people. And we know you are not deaf to the pain. We know that it is you that gives us the inspiration, the courage, the boldness to gather and to continue to demand, not beg, but demand. that this country lives into her creed, that we live into our baptisms, and our denominations live into their creeds. So be with us, protect us, guide us. And if there are any of us who have become bitter, oh God, circumcise our hearts, that we might be steadfast, but that we might all engage this work in love. I give you thanks for all these assembled. Give them a double portion of your blessing, oh God, as we march and sing and chant and are active in our faith. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I'm an elder at Christian Temple Church, and I would like to invite you into our moment of communion. Let us begin with some prayer. God of all our days, teach us to accept responsibility for our actions, no matter how embarrassing they may be. Remind us that nothing from our past can stand in the way of our future with you. Teach us especially to love those who may have witnessed what we have done, may have suffered as a result of our actions. Our temptation may be to shun them, as Sarah shunned Hagar, because shunning them helps us pretend that the actions never happened. Make clear to us, God who knows all about us, that our past will never go away, but it does not need to define us. With the life you make possible, we are given daily choices to make daily opportunities to make new choices. Help us to use those choices to love everyone in our lives, even those who remind us of our past. Help us to build the world you would have us live in, a world where we love others, especially those who are hurting, those who need our help. Help us to create a world where we care for your creation, where we take responsibility for the injustice that has been woven into our common life. Just as our own bad choices from the past can linger in our present lives, so too do the bad and in some cases evil choices of the past linger in our present communities. These choices have created great suffering and have robbed many of the fullness of life. Insist, O God, that we take responsibility for fixing these injustices. Help us to commit ourselves to taking real action to heal our world, real action to change communities and to change lives. For it is in the fullness of life, found in the love of others and in the love of your creation, that we truly find ourselves. This is a life that your Son Jesus showed us. Help us to follow him every day of our lives and to remember the last night when he was surrounded by his friends. And he said to his friends, "This is my body, given for you." But it was also the last night that he would spend with his friends. And so help us remember that he said to them, "This is my blood, poured out for you." As often as we eat of this bread and drink of this cup, we proclaim the Lord's death and commit to creating the world he would have for us. The peace of Christ be with you.
When I'm in trouble, please walk with me. When my head is bowed in